So I would say my journey with climate education has been a little bit unconventional. So I started a company called SOULMUCH, where I was just a waitress at a restaurant, firsthand witnessing the amount of food waste in the US that was being thrown away every single night. So we're trying to educate people about food waste, such a taboo topic, and how do we rewire people's brain to realize that waste is only waste if people waste it.
Well, hello, and welcome to the Climate Emergency Forum. My name is Charles Gregoire, and I'm a co-producer of the Climate Emergency Forum videos along with Heidi Bro. Today's program is Climate Education Empowerment for Change, where we will discuss some of the many facets of climate education. I will introduce each panelist, and I will ask them each to raise their arm as I announce them. John D. Liu is a journalist, filmmaker, ecologist, and ecosystem ambassador for Common Land Foundation, whose work has helped to show that it is possible to restore natural ecological systems. He is the founder of the Ecosystem Restoration Camps movement that has, together with many partners, created more than 60 communities in 30 countries. Reyanne Mustafa is an upcycling enthusiast and co-founder of SOULMUCH Foods, a trailblazer in combating food waste and climate change. Her impactful speeches at venues like TEDx, the United Nations, Coachella, and the Global Wave Conference reflect her dedication. Dr. Peter Carter, who will be joining us via video recording, is a medical doctor with a background in environmental health policy. He is the director of the Climate Emergency Institute, as well as an IPCC expert reviewer and co-author of Unprecedented Crime: Climate Science Denial and Game Changers for Survival. Paul Beckwith, also via video recording, is a climate system scientist who is taught at the University of Ottawa in the Laboratory for Paleoclimatology, as well as at Carleton University. Paul is a well-known climate educator on YouTube. Dan Galpern is founder, executive director, and general counsel to Climate Protection and Restoration Initiative. He has served as legal and policy advisor to climate scientist Dr. James Hansen since 2011. I now turn it over to John.
Yes, hello everyone, and everyone out there. Thanks so much for having me. I'm very grateful to the organizers and to the Common Land Foundation and the Mustard Seed Trust for helping me to make my work possible. What we've been doing is creating ecosystem restoration communities around the world. And it started, interestingly, with dreams. I was having dreams, and people were going camping and somehow were happy and doing restoration. And I thought I was in Groundhog Day, and I had that dream every morning. I would wake up with this dream on my mind. And so I shook my head and thought, I have to get this dream out of my head. But finally, it just kept coming back, so I wrote an essay called Earth Restoration Peace Camps, and it was published in Permaculture magazine, and tens of thousands of people said, this is what we want. And so when that happened, we just had to start this movement. And now, in 6 years, we've gone from 0 camps and communities to 65 communities around the world. And this is growing very fast. We've hit exponential growth. And what we see is the people who are in these communities, they're learning by doing. So their education is exactly what we need to know in order to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So they're sequestering carbon in organic soils, they're increasing the fertility, they're infiltrating and retaining moisture, they're having complete vegetation, in fact, transformational changes by using food forests and by rewilding techniques. And at the end of this, it re-regulates the hydrological cycle and the weather and the climate. So this is the lowest cost and the highest impact. And what's most exciting to me is that this can also be applied to people who have lost their basic human rights. So generally here we're talking about people in the developed world who have funds and who have jobs and who have a lot of resources, but around the world there are millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions and potentially billions of people who are desperately poor, and they're hungry, and they're not well educated, and they are completely available to restore the earth. And by restoring the earth, what we saw, if you haven't seen any of my work, I did a film called Hope in a Changing Climate, which was broadcast one day before the Copenhagen COP15 on the BBC. And this shows how in China, some of the poorest people in the country were able to be trained to be restorationists, and how they transformed their landscape. And when you do this, you change everything. So it wasn't only that it was very effective in mitigating and adapting to climate change, it was extraordinarily successful at that, but it also changed the productivity, the fertility, the social welfare, the educational levels, and the economics systems for those people. So I highly recommend that we do education through doing and make the infrastructure available to all the people who are ready and willing to work for restoration. So please go to ecosystemrestorationcommunities.org or erg.earth and check it out. And if you want to reach me, I'm John D. Liu at iCloud.com. Please, we want everyone to join this movement. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you. And now we're going to hear from Reyanne.
Awesome. Thank you guys all for tuning in and coming here today. So I would say my journey with climate education has been a little bit unconventional. So I started a company called SOULMUCH, where I was just a waitress at a restaurant, firsthand witnessing the amount of food waste in the US that was being thrown away every single night. And prior to being in the restaurant industry, my education of what I thought was food waste was, the scraps on people's plates or anybody's leftover food. But little did I know that until I was in the industry, firsthand witnessing it, I saw that it was so much more. So started a company where we actually upcycled all of the food waste from restaurants, primarily rice, because that's actually the #1 wasted food in the restaurant industry. And then we upcycled it into different products that we then sold to people. And the first product that we launched was cookies. And we realized that with this campaign, it was going to be very unique, right? So we're trying to educate people about food waste, such a taboo topic, and how do we rewire people's brain to realize that waste is only waste if people waste it. So we went to the drawing board and we're like, hey, what can we do? What can we do? And we really thought about it. We're like, how can we make food waste sexy? Cookies. Everybody loves cookies, right? So that became our vehicle to every time someone purchased from us or they bought our products that have a little QR code that they can then kind of hear our story, or they saw us at different events, or they saw me speaking. It was really our opportunity to allow others to kind of rewire their brain to reimagine the idea of waste. And so our whole mission, yes, we were selling delicious, healthy, yummy vegan cookies, but really it was so much more beyond that. And so that was initially my first avenue into very unconventional climate education. And we've been able to strategically partner with some of the largest restaurant chains in the nation, at least in the US. So we got partnerships with Starbucks, P.F. Chang's, Things, True Food Kitchen. And then once they saw the momentum, and once they first didn't want to be a part of the campaign, right? Because it's a little taboo, it's a little off the traditional path. But then once they saw that people were really on board with this noble mission, they then also wanted to be the forefront of this campaign. So then they were also advocating, they were making flyers, and they were also putting on their social media that they're partnering with an upcycling company like us. We were college restaurant workers and working with some of the largest businesses, food businesses in the nation, to kind of create this climate education around food waste. And we weren't pointing the fingers at them. We were understanding that, food waste just happens in the restaurant industry, but that gave us such an incredible runway to kind of run with it. Because when people put something so intimate like food or a cookie inside their mouth, right, that's a very similar to what you had said, we have to educate by doing, people are going to be a lot more inclined to listen and to pay attention. And oftentimes we didn't actually tell them until after they ate the product. So a lot of the times people didn't actually know. And then once they taste it, they liked our mission, they would go on our website and they'd be like, what? This cookie was made out of food waste? And then we go into explaining how food waste is a big contributor to greenhouse gases, so on and so forth. So that was my first avenue into climate education. And then I've kind of pivoted now into making art and using art as the vehicle to really raise awareness about our trash and plastic consumption. And a campaign that I'd recently done, I'm from California, San Diego, California, and we had quite a prevalent styrofoam problem that was happening and occurring on the beaches. And so a few artists and I got together, we did a campaign where we did a bunch of pieces, and we actually posted all over social media. We got a huge rally, and then we actually took that to our city council and then educated not only the public, but allowed the government to actually ban styrofoam in our city. So I would say that if I were to put my experiences out there, I think that the most effective ways, sometimes the most powerful steps into education are very unconventional ones, and allowing people to think outside the box, whether that's putting a cookie in their mouth that they realize is made out of food waste, or an art piece that they see from a distance that they love, but then they come closer and they realize, oh, that's actually made out of cigarette butts or styrofoam or plastic bottle caps.
Thank you so much, Reyanne. That's a wonderful endeavor you've done. I think people should check out, you have a website?
Yeah, they can find me on my social media channels. It's my first and last name, Reyanne Mustafa.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And now we'd like to hear from our first video guest, Dr. Peter Carter.
So climate change education, it's really clear that there's always been a great need for climate change education, and the greatest need is today because nobody's doing anything, right? Nobody's doing anything apart from pushing more fossil fuels. So certainly our young people have to really know this stuff. And there's two big reasons why they really need to know it. Number one, they need to tell the governments what to do. And to tell the governments what to do, they've got to use the science to persuade the governments, just asking them, you have to do this because if you don't, this will happen, this will happen, this will happen. And the other thing, unfortunately, the other reason why the young people have to be well educated with climate change is the deniers are out there more than ever. And their tactics and strategy from their point of view, I think is better than ever. So people have to really know the science in order to deal with the denial campaign. I just want to mention two good sources, particularly for young people. My very favorite one on the internet is Action for the Climate Emergency. It's really excellent. It's done by a young man and a young lady, and very, very good. Now, the other source, which is very good, is Causes and Effects of Climate Change, which is put out by National Geographic. And I think that's probably the best on that kind of education resource. It's more than tragic on why the young people, or why we have to be talking about the failure of education. The big cause is the denial campaign. The biggest success, malicious success, the denial campaign had years ago was to prevent climate change education into the formal education system. They took principals of schools to court, they sued various schools, and that had a chill effect on climate change education, which I think lasts up to this day. But there's another reason why, in general, there's not the information out there about how bad the situation is. Long ago, I came across a brick wall in which, both from the directors of the NGOs and from the senior scientists, I was frequently being told, you know, you can't say that because that's going to scare people. And we will not scare people. This was universal from the scientists. Well, I mean, I've been a physician all my life. I know human beings aren't like that, but it made no difference to them. They said to me, no, 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 you're wrong. So that's another big reason why we are sort of in this mess. Now, there is a new and recent reason, and it comes from the science, because the science that's being put out is, thing I can say, I guess it's phony science. For example, net zero, right? Means nothing, absolutely nothing. But it sounds like it's easy and it sounds like everybody's doing it. No, you have to know the science to know that you can't have any burning, right? Whatever your goal, you've got to stop burning. The reason for that is that we need to be teaching the greenhouse gas pollution science. This really isn't done in climate change education. And I'll just finish by saying something I've been saying over and over and over. Because of the science of zero, the solutions are all conversion. So the solutions all have to be 100% conversion. Conversion 100% of fossil fuels, conversion 100% of nitrogen polluting agriculture, and it goes on and on.
Our second video guest is Paul Beckwith.
Climate communication is vitally needed in this day and age. And I think a lot of the misinformation about climate was actually preceding a lot of the general misinformation and fake news that we're seeing in all different aspects today. Well spread across all social media and actually even mainstream media. There's just tremendous amounts of misinformation, tremendous amounts of propagation, and news stories are released that try to seem like they're covering a situation fairly, but they're really quite often not. They're very subvertly putting language into the news, et cetera, that tends to, either deny climate outright or downplay the effects of what's happening. And this is all across the board. This is the COP28 conference, climate conference. People gathered from around the world. And the main things discussed are this hope, which is a hope. It's not possible anymore, but to maintain 1.5 degrees. 2023, we're already at 1.5 degrees for the year. If you talk about a 10-year moving average above 1.5, well, that'll take 5 more years or a few more years to reach that. And 2 degrees, in 15 years, we'll have a whole year above 2 degrees, probably. That's what the best science from James Hansen's Global Warming in the Pipeline is saying. So the communication has always been a challenge for climate change because it's not easy to explain a lot of the concepts of what's causing it, the different connections between parts of the climate system. But more and more people are understanding it, but it's still always a battle against the denial communities. Personally, I've been trying to communicate the risks and dangers of climate change for many, many years with my YouTube channel, with my advocacy, with my work at the University of Ottawa and Carleton. Years ago, shortly after the Kyoto Protocol was introduced, I gathered a petition, about 1,500 names, for Elizabeth May to present in the Canadian Parliament, saying we have to meet the targets of Kyoto, et cetera. Of course, I've been on lots of protests. I've constantly been giving talks in schools. There's my talks on my videos on my own video channel, talks at conferences, press conferences at COP, starting at Lima in 2014 and then Paris 2015 and about 3 or 4 of the most recent COP. Just trying to plug away and get the message about the urgency and severe consequences if we don't address the climate issue. Of course, there's the work that we do on the Climate Emergency Forum channel. We put out weekly videos on the pressing climate issues. Also work with facingfuture.tv, another group. I use Twitter a lot to try to get messages out to people. Peter mentioned we need basic climate change education for the very young people in schools. And that's just not happening in most school systems around the world. If we're getting more information on climate to the public. It's very important that we use avenues like the arts and literature. There's lots of nonfiction climate books that have come out in the last few years. There's a lot more so-called fly-fi climate fiction book. As far as COP28 is concerned, I think one of the most important messages I'd like to say is for education is that we can't just rely on slashing fossil fuel emissions. We can't just rely on being able to scale up carbon dioxide removal methods in time to make a big dent on greenhouse gases. We need to really look at interventions to cool the climate. Peter Wadhams and his colleagues just put out a very important paper to try to educate people at COP28 that we need to expand our horizons and look at these climate cooling interventions.
We're going to hear from Dan Galpern.
Much, Charles and colleagues. I wish to direct myself now to new and young eligible voters in the United States, even though I speak today from Dubai, a city-state that is suffused right now with the toxic brew of empty rhetoric and particle pollution. Both those features stem from an embrace of fossil fuels, including their continuous and even increased production. That deadly embrace threatens persons with pre-existing respiratory disease, the elderly, children, least developed nations, and future generations. Something needs to give. But beyond that ultimately suicidal project, which we must soon turn around, there exists an even more immediately dire threat to our climate system and thus to our planet. Because the world cannot turn around this near ultimate problem of climate change in the absence of United States engagement, if not leadership. And U.S. political leaders have proven themselves time and again incapable of resisting the siren song of big oil money without an engaged and demanding public in a system that respects fundamental democratic rights and the rule of law. And it is for that reason, then, that I expressly address new and young eligible voters in the United States. Because at least to judge from one recent poll, substantially more Americans in the 18 to 29 age group intend right now to sit out the 2024 election than did in 2020. That would be, in my judgment, a major mistake, perhaps catastrophic. Much, if not all, that we hold dear about the American democratic experiment depends on respect in principle and in fact for the rule of law. And it is for that reason, then, that the lawless and authoritarian threat to our democracy from Trump and his merry gang of anti-constitutional insurrectionists needs to be resisted. Resisted indeed with every reasonable tool under the law that is now and will be at our disposal. And your participation in both the upcoming primary and general elections resides at or near the top of actions that you, your friends, and your family can reasonably take. Now, let me also say this. I well understand the disillusion that many young people in the United States may well feel at this moment. The Biden team has accomplished a great deal, and yet, in my mind, too, it could have done far more, perhaps especially with respect to ensuring against violations of the fundamental norms of international law by our allies, including with respect to the conflict and crisis in Gaza, and also with respect to the need to reinstating the fundamental rights of women in the United States, and also, of course, in more fully facing up to and leading the charge against dangerous climate change. But as to the overwhelming Trump lawlessness at home, I need to point out, and with considerable regret as an officer of the courts, that we really can take little solace in the current prosecutions of Trump and his BAGA henchmen of 91 and counting state and federal felonies. Why not? Because the wheels of justice take time, and Trump's attorneys, as incompetent as they may seem, still sufficiently understand how to delay justice through endless motions and appeals in their drive to wait it out until November and thus deny justice. And the same is true about some of the very well-grounded efforts, again pursuant to law, to keep Trump off the ballot in the various states in light of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which bans insurrectionists against the Constitution from returning to high office. The problem is that state court judges and also, I'm afraid, United States Supreme Court justices may not have the courage of conviction that our framers and founders anticipated they would in fact retain. And so, I think, it comes down to this. The ultimate guarantors of the American democratic experiment and the rule of law right now may be you and me. That we faithfully fulfill our own democratic responsibilities now is rendered even more important by the climate crisis, because neither the Paris Agreement nor the underlying Framework Convention are self-executing under United States law. These agreements can be implemented and enforced, if at all, in our nation only by rational and far-reaching action pursuant to U.S. domestic law. And so it is that our willingness to act without fear or even in the face of fear, that is, with courage as well as conviction and determination, is needed to protect and restore both our nation and the climate system, on which the safety and welfare of our brethren and nature as we have come to know it necessarily depend. But what, finally, you may ask, what if you actually retain little expertise in the law, or even with respect to the American electoral system? Perhaps you slept through your American civics class in high school, or your first-year government class in college. If so, maybe you should wait it out, look on from the side, and garner the requisite knowledge of civics slowly, at your own pace. My advice, with respect, is this: do not wait. Figure it out right now and in the weeks ahead. Look, this is not rocket science. Even the delegate selection process in the United States is not rocket science. Indeed, it is not even climate science. You have the means, you have the intelligence, and really, the cost of participation is quite low. But what is at stake is literally, nearly everything. This is your time, not 2026, not 2028, right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. I will highlight the importance of climate education from the point of view that if one is new to this topic, one can be led down different denier-crafted rabbit holes, which can be quite sophisticated in their framing of information. I have found that if the information you're being exposed to seems out of step with the main body of science, it's a good idea to do some research to confirm whatever claim is being made. Let me highlight the following resources that I have found to be helpful to me. Skepticalscience.com, whose mission is to debunk climate misinformation by presenting peer-reviewed science and explaining the techniques of science denial, discourses of climate delay, and climate solutions denial. The YouTube channel called Potholer54, which is a series of videos that debunk the popular fake science. These videos are produced by journalist Peter Hadfield. A YouTube channel and video put together by Simon Clark called Global Warming: An Inconvenient History. And you can also check out our FAQ at theclimateemergencyforum.org. Thank you to all our esteemed panelists, to Sustainable Population Australia, and the International Society for Ecological Economics, and to all of you for attending this presentation.